Okay, good evening. Welcome back. I'm just going to get started in a second. Do this. Go ahead. This is Rabbi Jeff Sachs of WebYeshiva.org with another installment in our History and Mechanics of Torah She-Baal Peh, focusing on the writings of the Rambam. Okay, welcome back, everyone. I hope everybody can hear me. Okay, there's Ezra's baby or something on vacation. I'm going to mute him. If you have a video camera, please turn it on. Okay. It's going to show us the phone over here. If you have a video camera, hit send video. Let me see, who do we have with us? I apologize for all of the interruptions to our normal schedule. I think I mentioned on Tuesday night, I know a number of you with us on Tuesday night, we just had a bar mitzvah. My eldest son became bar mitzvah, and that of course was connected with the visit of lots of relatives from America, and that got in the way of our normal learning. I hope you had some interesting meetings with Rabbi Bailey, who substituted for us a little bit. I want to go back now. I think in this series, I think we only have another one meeting after this. And I want to look at some other writings in the Rambam. Until now, we've been focused almost exclusively on the Rambam's introduction to his Perush HaMishnayot, to his Mishna commentary. And I wanted to look tonight at something else from his famous Hilchot Talmud Torah, from the Mishna Torah, the work of his middle age. The Rambam's three great works. The Mishna commentary is the work of his youth. He starts writing it probably already as a teenager, and he finishes writing it when he's 30. 30 is still pretty young. The Mishna Torah, his great encyclopedia of halacha, the Yad HaChazakah, is the project of his middle age. And the Mor Nevuchim, the Guide to the Perplexed, his great philosophical work, is the product of his older age. There's a Gemara. The Gemara in Kiddushin on Daf Lamed Omid Aleph, page 30a, is the source for the Rambam's halacha that we'll be looking at. But we'll see, as often is the case, it's a jumping board. The Rambam does some interesting things with it, both by way of interpretation and reinterpretation. The Gemara says, Omar Rav Safra Mishum Rabbi Yehoshua ben Chananya. Rav Safra says, in the name of Rabbi Yehoshua ben Chananya, Mai dichtiv, what is the meaning of the pasuk, Veshinantam levanecha? Pasuk we know it very well from Shema. Veshinantam levanecha literally means you shall teach your sons. Vishinantam is from the same root as Mishna. To teach, we can translate it literally as teaching. The Gemara elsewhere does some interesting things with Vishinantam. Rashi quotes it, and you can look on the pasuk. To see what Rashi does with it. The Maharal does some even more fantastic things with the pasuk Vishinantam. Perhaps on a different occasion we can look at those. But Vishinantam levanecha, to teach. Al tikrei Vishinantam, ella vishilashtem. Don't read to teach, ella rather you should read it, this kind of rabbinic play on words where we change one letter or a letter or two, and we can superimpose a midrashic meaning onto a pasuk that's not there on the literal text. Like remember Letterman. Remember Letterman of the electric company fame? It depends on what generation you are and what was being shown on PBS. I don't know that this was on public television in Poland, but the idea that you change one letter and you can change the meaning of something. So the midrashic reading of the okay, so not everybody's that's true. PBS is pretty old. PBS is pretty old. I can't believe that. Public broadcasting in America goes back there. Or maybe the program that I was referring to wasn't on when you were a kid, but public broadcasting is pretty old. We're looking it up right now on Wikipedia as we speak. But in all cases, the midrashic reading superimposed in the pasuk is that you should divide the learning into thirds. Shalosh v'shalosh, right? Le'olam yishalesh adam shnotav. A person should forever always divide his time into thirds. Not divide his time. The Gemara literally says his years. Your years of study should be divided into thirds. We'll see it's a machloket exactly how the division should work, but it seems from the pshat that the division is into periods, right? Into your earlier periods, your mid periods, your later periods. It's interesting. I hadn't thought about this. This corresponds to the 3 periods we talked about in the Rambam and his writing. Maybe it corresponds even more closely. Shlish b'mikra, a third of your time should be dedicated to mikra. Mikra literally is the scripture, what we call Tanakh. Shlish b'Mishna, a third in Mishnah, and a shlish b'Talmud. Now, it's interesting that the Gemara here is self-referential to Talmud. What we call Talmud, what we call Gemara, these are not clear terms. Mishnah, we know what the Mishnah is. Mishnah is the codification by Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi around the year 200 after 0 of the Shisha Sidrei Mishnah. Then you have a couple of hundred years of commentary and expansion on the Mishnah, which is codified around the year 500 in the Gemara. Together, the Mishnah and the Gemara are technically called the Talmud, although very often we refer colloquially by the term Gemara to refer to the whole thing. But when the Gemara refers to Talmud, what is it referring to? So the Gemara says, Mi yodea kama chayai. How do you know how long you're going to live? And you're supposed to divide your life, your learning life, into 3 periods. So how do you know how long you're going to live? Maybe you live to be 60, maybe you live to be 90. So if you start learning when you're, let's say when you're 10 or 5, right? The Mishnah says, Ben Chamesh Lemikra. You start your study of Chumash at the age of 5. And you will live to be 60. So that gives you 55 years of learning. Divide that into 3. How much does that give you? 55 divided by 3. Somebody help me out. About, what, 14 years? Right? Less than 16 and something years for each period. But maybe you're going to live to 90. And you're going to have 85 years. And then you should move from one period to the next after how many years? After, 27 years or so. So how do you know when you're a third of the way through life? So the Gemara says, no, it doesn't mean to divide your life into periods of 3 sets of chunks of years. Lo sricha liyome. You should divide your day into thirds. So that in your day of study, you should divide your time into thirds. Rashi actually says yemei hashvuah. Yemei hashvuah. That you should spend about a third of the week studying Mikra, studying Tanakh, a third of the week studying Mishnah, and a third of the week studying Talmud. the Gemara later, you don't have this on the page, but the Gemara itself later refers to Gemara, refers to Talmud, and tries to explain what is this. In other words, there's a problem here, because if the Gemara itself refers to Gemara, refers to a written codified work which hasn't yet been codified, so what is it referring to? By Talmud or by Gemara? Joel, what do you mean by that? By mistake? I don't understand the comment. Oh, I see. So Rashi defines what. Thanks for the help with the math. Rashi defines what the discipline called Gemara is before it's codified as the book that we have on the shelf. Svarot v'ta'amei stimotehem shel mishnayot. The svara, the logic, the rationalizations, the theories behind the halachot, and the ta'amim, the reasons or the explanations for the stimotehem, the things that are left unclear or contradictions or the Mishnaic teachings that have to be unpacked and explicated, uletartzeim b'ma shesotzrot ze et ze, and to explain the internal contradictions, or the seeming contradictions rather, of the Mishnah. That discipline is, Rashi defines Gemara or Talmud as a mode of thinking about the Mishnah and making applications of the Mishnah and trying to root out the core principles. That I may be adding a little bit to what Rashi's saying, but that it's the mode of thinking, the Talmud, what we call in Yiddish the Gemara cup. The mode of thinking is what the Gemara means in its self-referential or anachronistic comment about itself. Tosfot says something interesting. Tosfot here says that lo tzricha liyomei, that the Gemara is talking about dividing not your years, not periods of decades, but to divide up your days, which Rashi, Perush HaKuntras is Tosfos' nickname for Rashi, because of course when Tosfot, who in the first generation, Tosfot of course, I'm sure this is just a review, Tosfot of course is not one person, but it's a collection of commentaries. In the first generation, the movement of the commentaries of Tosfot were led by Rashi's grandchildren himself, and when they studied the Talmud, they didn't have, like we have, the Gemara printed with Rashi on the page. They had a manuscript which had the text of the Gemara, and they had a separate volume with Rashi's commentary on the Gemara, and of course they didn't have Tosfot because they were in the process of writing it. The commentary of Rashi was in these kuntrasim, kind of like notebooks. So Tosfot refers to Rashi's commentary as the kuntras, the notebook. Yemei HaShabbat, klomar shnei yamim mikra. So he's explaining what Rashi means. Rashi says 2 days a week you should learn mikra. Shnei yamim Mishna, v'shnei yamim Gemara, 6 days of the week. But Tosfos doesn't like that. He says, lo nehira. This is not, I do not agree with this. This is not so clear. The imkain, hu matzila mifrach, miyedeh kama chayai. Dunira li lefarish b'chol yom v'yom atzmo yishalesh, al kain tikain, b'seder of Amram Gon, k'moshe anu noagim, b'chol yom kodem psuke dezimra v'omar, mikra mishno gemara. So Rashi had said you should divide the week up. 2 days for this, and 2 days for that, and 2 days for that, and 1 day of Shabbos, where I guess you can learn whatever you want, or maybe you review what you've learned. So Tosfos says that doesn't make sense, and it doesn't even really fit in with the wording of the Gemara. that every day you should divide up, and every day you should learn a little bit of this, a little bit of that, a little bit of the third thing. And he points out that that's our practice. In our Siddur, he quotes the Siddur of Rav Amram Gon, which was a very ancient codification of the Siddur, probably the oldest codification of the Siddur that we have, but we have it in our own Siddur, and that after Birkat HaTorah, in the morning, we immediately learn a little something. And we learn one keta from Mikra, and one from Mishna, and one from Talmud, or from Chazal. And that this, the kind of embodiment of what a chunk of Torah study is, right there represents the curriculum that we should have. The Rabbeinu Tam, the great progenitor of the Tosfot movement, Rashi's grandson, Piresh, Anu Samchim, Ahad Aminim B'Sanhedrin, Bavel. Why is the Talmud called the Talmud Bavli? Well, I mean, literally it's called the Talmud Bavli because it's written in Bavel. But what's Bavel? Bavel is like the Migdal Bavel. What's the Migdal Bavel? What does the word Bavel mean? Confusion or mixed up. Blula. It's all mixed up. B'mikra, b'mishna, u'v'gemara. The Gemarat Bavel balul mikulam. That when you learn Gemara, says Rabbeinu Tam, really you're learning everything. Because in the Gemara you have the Mishnah, and you have Psukim, and it's a kind of chulent, as it were, of all of the component parts. That's the Gemara with the Rashi and the Tosfot. Let me just look at this comment to you. Last something we had taught that if there's no Rashi on something, it's because he didn't find anything to ask. Someone once told me it's because the notebooks or pages of notebooks dealing with these areas were lost. Right, so that's probably certainly true. In other words, you're referring to Rashi's commentary on Chumash. Which is really quite extensive. There's very little bit of Chumash where we don't have Rashi. But it's possible that there were versions of Rashi. Rashi apparently wrote more than one draft or one edition of his commentary on Chumash, on Tanakh, and it's something that he worked on and kept revising many years, year after year. And there are no doubt there are things that he took out, and there are no doubt things that he edited in, and there are different manuscripts of Rashi's commentary that don't all jive together. This is something that has been written on, so Joel, you're talking about something else, about Rashi in Gemara. That's something else altogether, where there are places in Rashi and Gemara where we know it's not Rashi. We know that the Rashbam, Rashi's other famous grandson, completed Rashi's commentary in some places, and there are places where there's a mixture in any one parak of Rashi's commentary and that of the Rashbam or some other unknown figure. So in terms of the text of Rashi, but one imagines that a very, very high percentage of the places where we refer to Rashi, it's the real thing. There's an interesting comment in terms of Rashi's commentary on Chumash. There's an interesting comment of the Lubavitcher Rebbe. The Lubavitcher Rebbe, Zichrono Livracha, wrote a commentary on Rashi. Rashi is one of those, larger-than-life works, Rashi on Chumash. I mean, it's so central to our identity as students of Torah that when we talk about learning Chumash, it's almost a given that we're talking about learning Chumash with Rashi, that it's almost built into the study of learning Chumash. Rashi, of course, the great anthologizer of Chazal. most of what Rashi writes aren't original writings. It's selections of Chazal's interpretation of Psukim, which Rashi presents to us with a certain interpretive agenda. The Lubavitcher Rebbe said in his commentary on Rashi, there are many, many, many commentaries on Rashi's commentary on the Chumash. Those commentaries are called super commentaries. It's a funny term, super commentary. You think like Superman or Mighty Mouse or something like that. But super commentaries are commentaries on commentaries. Those of you that visit the WebYeshiva blog, Alan helped me out and put up the link to it. Those of you that visit the WebYeshiva blog will know that my wife, Ilana Sachs, gives a weekly podcast called The Rashi of the Week, where she takes one Rashi in Chumash and she tries to explain what Rashi is doing there. It's really worth your while to listen to that. And usually you can get a good Dvar Torah for Shabbat out of it. And in that podcast, part of what she's doing is trying to introduce people to the super commentaries on Rashi, who try to understand what Rashi was doing, and that kind of perennial question: what's bothering Rashi? Why did he choose this commentary over that commentary? When Rashi brings two interpretations, why did he do that? Why was one not sufficient? These are the kind of meta questions that the commentators on Rashi tend to be motivated by. So the Lubavitcher Rebbe says, we know that Chazal thought that you should start studying Chumash at the age of 5. That's the Mishna I mentioned, Ben Chamesh Lemikra. But when you are thrown into the study of Mikra at the age of 5, there's a lot you don't know because you haven't learned it before. In other words, when we read Parshat Matot Umaseh this year, we can't free ourselves from the fact that we read it last year and the year before and the year before. So even though there might be value, Martin Buber someplace has this very dramatic expression that when you read Tanakh, you should always try to imagine it's the first time you're encountering it. Don't be prejudiced by your very many reads of it before. Don't be prejudiced by the fact that you know how the story is going to end. Well, that's always important to remember. Think of think of the Yosef stories in the second half or third of Sefer Breshit. Imagine reading them as an adult. Most of us knew the story, as children. Even if we weren't students of Torah in the conventional sense, the Bible stories are usually familiar, or at least you saw the musical. But imagine encountering the story of Yosef as an adult, meaning with the cognitive faculties of an adult, but without knowing how it's going to end, right? Without knowing that it has the ending that it has. He gets thrown into the pit. You go to commercial break, it's a cliffhanger, you think maybe he's really dead. We can't read it that way because we're always conscious of the fact that we know what's going to happen. But imagine reading it the way that you would really read a piece of literature that was unfamiliar to you. And it would be so gripping in a way that sometimes we're unable to be gripped because the story is so built into our DNA, into our knowledge and our identities and our memory banks. So Lubavitcher Rebbe says, Ben Chamesh Lemikra means the first time, that first read. But when you read Chumash for the first time without any of the background, you're going to have a lot of obvious questions that you won't have on the second read. So Rashi's agenda, claims the Lubavitcher Rebbe, was to give all of the background information that an intelligent 5-year-old would need in order to make a understandable reading on the first pass. All of the things that you need to know so that you won't come to an error or a misinterpretation without that outside knowledge. So the first time you read, you've never read Chumash before. It's like that character we've discussed a few times, the Martian that lands and checks into a motel and takes the Bible out of the night table, and I don't know. I'm not sure. Sherry, about your question about did Buber give you a method for doing it? I don't think so. I think it's just a. I can probably find the quote in a second. I think it was just a piece of advice on how you should try to, create an illusion, an intellectual illusion as you approach it. So the first time you're reading Tanakh, first time you're reading Chumash, you're going to Parshas Mishpatim, you're going to read ayin tachat ayin. So I guess you're logically going to think that really means an eye for an eye, you should poke out the other guy's eye. So Rashi there tells you that that's not what it means. That's not what the pshat of the pasuk is. The pshat of the pasuk is what Chazal tell us it is. And Rashi's going to fill in all those blanks, and he's going to tell you the outside information you need to know so that you're not going to be led astray by what you would otherwise think from your Martian reading of the book you find in the night table stand. And Lubavitcher Rebbe then says Rashi's commentary is made up or is motivated, or his agenda as a parshan comes from his own questions as an intelligent 5-year-old. That when Rashi, when young Shlomo, when young boy that would grow up to become Rashi, read Chumash for the first time as a 5-year-old, these were all the questions that he had. And then the writing of the commentary is just a way of filling in the blanks on the questions that he had as a 5-year-old. This is a very radical idea. I don't know where Lubavitcher Rebbe gets it from, but I don't know if it's historically true, but it's a very profound idea. That's what Rashi's agenda is. This Gemara, that you have to divide the curriculum, as it were, whether it's by year or by week or by day, into Mikra, Mishna, and Talmud, is taken up by the Rambam. The Rambam's great work, Hilchot Talmud Torah, the laws of Torah study, available, I'm certain, even in English online. I think that we have links to it from the WebYeshiva homepage. On the WebYeshiva homepage, we have a link. I've mentioned this a number of times, but it's worth repeating. On the WebYeshiva homepage, we have collected up links to online Jewish books. So if you go to the WebYeshiva homepage, at the bottom of the homepage, there's a heading that says Resources, and then there's a link towards the bottom that says Online Sfarim. So if you click on that, you'll get to a link that has many, many links. You get to a page that has many, many links to online Jewish texts in Hebrew, in English, Tanakh, Midrash, Mishnah, etc. You'll also find under Halacha, online Torah texts, Halacha, Rambam's Mishna Torah. We don't have a link to it in English. We do have a link to the Rambam's Mishna Torah with Nikud. I'm pretty sure that you can even get the Mishna Torah in English online. We will try to find that. We will try to find that link. We will try to find that link for you. 1 second. Yes, indeed, here it is. Of course, on Chabad.org. Right here. I'm sending you the link to Hilchot Talmud Torah in English. It's going up. Alan beat me to it. Alan beat me to it, but there it is. There it is. There's the link in the chat box on Chabad.org. Chabad.org has a wonderful online library of books, of classic books in Hebrew and English, and there you go. You can never beat Alan to the punch. You can never beat Alan to the punch. The Rambam's Hilchot Talmud Torah, the Laws of Torah Study, which would be worthy of a series on its own. Maybe we'll get to that. The Rambam says the following things at the very end of the first chapter. V'chayav l'shalesh et zman l'midato. A person has to divide his learning time. Shlish b'torah shebechtav, shlish b'torah shebal peh, v'shlish in this other thing which he's about to explain. But it takes him a few lines to explain it. And first of all, what jumps off the page at you? What has the Rambam already done? No? He's combined Gemara and Mishnah. He's changed around the categories. He's changed around the categories. Let me just highlight this for you so that it's clear what's going on here. Okay. The Gemara had said Mikra, Mishnah, and Talmud. The Rambam changed the category. Mikra, he turns Torah shebechtav. That's a pretty fair switch. Mikra, kra, literally means scripture, the Tanakh. And the Rambam gives it its more general name, the Torah shebechtav, the written law. Mishnah, he turns Torah shebal peh, the oral law. Now that's interesting because Mishnah, we were pretty clear we understood what Mishnah was. Mishnah is that work of the Mishnah by Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, the codification of Torah shebal peh at that point, and its division into different categories. As a matter of fact, we discussed that at great length a number of weeks ago when the Rambam in the Hakdama LaPerish HaMishnah describes what the Mishnah was and the order of the Mishnah and the accomplishment of Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi, the epistemological work of trying to divide knowledge into different categories, overarching categories, subcategories, etc. So the Rambam now expands that, as it were, to mean all of Torah shebal peh. Now, generally speaking, Torah shebal peh is what we call everything that's not Tanakh, is in a sense, Torah shebal peh. The third category, the green category here, what the Gemara calls, what the Gemara in Kiddushin calls Talmud, here expanding on what Rashi did, Rashi tried to give you a definition of what Talmudic thinking is. The Rambam really expands that. And he defines it as following. Yavin v'yaskil, you shall understand, and two words for understanding, seichel, right? You should wisely understand. You should figure it out. Achrit davar mereshito, the end of a matter from its beginning. What that means, we'll have to explain in a minute. V'yotzi davar mi davar, and you should extrapolate one matter from the next. V'yidamed davar ledavar, and you should make comparisons. V'yavin b'midot she'atorah nidreshet bohem, and you should imply hermeneutical principles, which we discussed earlier, the rules of midrashic interpretation of the psukim. We spent some time discussing that a number of weeks ago. The 13 hermeneutical principles, the Shlosha Srei Midot, She'atorah Nidreshet Bahem, according to Rabbi Yishmael, which is printed in the Siddur at the end of Birkat HaShachar, at the end, before Pesukei Zimra, before Baruch She'amar. That work, that interpretive work, interpretation according to the rules and principles that Chazal were entrusted with to interpret the Torah, you should do all of this work, all of this kind of heavy lifting of understanding, of trying to figure out achrit davar mereshito, the end of a matter, the consequences of a matter, the implications from one point to larger principles, to make comparisons, to extrapolate, to apply the rules of interpretation. Heich hu ikar hamidot veheich yotzi ha'asur v'amutar, making halachic conclusions, v'kiyotzi bahem midvarim shelamad mipi hashmu'ah, all according to what you've learned from the interpretive tradition. Mipi hashmu'ah, the collective interpretive tradition of the Torah Shebichtav via the Torah She-Baal Peh, as passed down to us through Chazal. The inyan zeh hu hanikra Gemara. That's what Gemara is. Now the Gemara, what we call Gemara, that book, it's printed in different editions. You may know it as Steinsaltz, you may know it as Schottenstein, you may know the Vilna edition. But that page, that classic, iconic page of Talmud, that is not Gemara. That's a snapshot of Gemara with a capital G, with a capital Gimel, which is really a mode of thinking and a mode of interpretation. And the Gemara that we have, the book by that name, the work by that name, that text with Rashi printed on the inside column and Tosfot printed on the outside column and Mishnayot in between and Rishonim in the back, that's a kind of encapsulation of the method. But the work of Gemara, that goes on. And not only can we study Gemara, but we can do Gemara by engaging in that type of interpretive reasoning. And that is what you have to do when you study Gemara according to the Rambam. And the Rambam goes on and says, Keitzad, how do you do this? So he gives you an example. Haya bal umanut. You're a craftsman, let's say. Let's say you're a shoemaker, or you're a woodworker, or you're a whatever it is. You work for a living. I'm sure on other occasions you've heard this point made about the Rambam's feeling about the value of work, and the Rambam's attitude towards kollel study, or things of that nature. So you're a worker. You have to get up. You have to take your lunch pail. You have to go to work. And you make your living by working 3 hours a day. You know, a lot of people spend more time than that on the commute back and forth. But the Rambam assumes that you can make your living by working 3 hours a day. Uvetorah teisha. So you're left with 9 hours to learn. Because I guess he assumed that the day was like 12 hours. And the other 12 hours you were involved with, I guess, sleep or something like that. I mean, this may have something to do with the fact that in a pre-modern era, when the sun went down, that was the end of the day. But you work for 3 hours, and therefore you have 9 hours of leisure time, and that, of course, is dedicated to Torah study. Otan teisha קורא בשלוש מהם בתורה שבכתב ובשלוש בתורה שבעל פה. Right? You should, if you have 9 hours to learn, you should spend 3 of them learning Torah שבכתב, 3 hours learning Torah שבעל פה, ושלוש אחרות מתבונן בדעתו להבין דבר מדבר. And the other 3 hours should be involved. In the other 3 hours, you should be involved in reflective study. Reflective study in order to have it all make sense and to kind of make applications. That it's not enough to study and to absorb facts, but you have to make applications of the knowledge to life. The Divrei Kabbalah, by Divrei Kabbalah, let's be clear, the Rambam is not talking about mysticism. Right? He's not talking about, the Zohar or other things. By Divrei Kabbalah, the Rambam is talking about the Torah ha-mikubelet, the received interpretation of the Torah. Bechlal Torah shebechtav hein uferushan bechlal Torah shebal peh v'ha'inyanim hanikre'im pardes bechlal gemara hein. And the matters that are called pardes are part of Gemara. Remember, Gemara here doesn't mean Daf Yomi. Daf Yomi is here. It's in the second category. Gemara is the work that you do to extend it. That work, that reflective, interpretive engagement in thinking about the material, that includes a component called pardes. We'll have to explain what pardes is, but pardes probably means, according to the Rambam, philosophical study. Philosophical study. B'ma dvarim amurim, what are we talking about? B'tchilat Talmudo shel Adam. However, the Rambam, until now the Rambam goes according to whose opinion? The Rambam is like Rashi or like Tosfot? No? Who does the Rambam go like? How should you divide the time? Like Rashi or like Tosfot? No? You out there? Hello? No? Everybody take a vote. Like Tosfot. Correct, Stuart. Correct, Stuart. Like Tosfot. As Tosfot said, it doesn't mean you divide the week, it means you divide the day. That every day you should spend a third in this, and a third in that, and a third in the other thing. So the Rambam limits that. The Rambam limits the ruling of the Gemara and says that this tripartite division, this splitting up into thirds, is talking about Tchilat Talmudo shel Adam, when somebody is beginning his course of study. Aval kesheyagdil bechokma v'lo yehet tzarech lo lilmod Torah shebechtav v'lo la'asok b'Torah shebal peh. But when he's grown in wisdom and he no longer has a need for ongoing study of Torah shebal peh or Torah shebechtav or Torah shebal peh, יקרא בעיתים מזומנים תורה שבכתב ודברי השמועה, כדי שלא ישכח דבר מדברי דיני תורה. You should study Torah שבעל פה and Torah שבכתב only in order to prevent forgetting. But at a certain point, you can dedicate your time to the third category. ויפנה כל ימיו לגמרא בלבד. לפי רוחב שיש בליבו ויישוב דעתו. And after you've mastered the set curriculum, after you've studied all of Torah Shebechtav and Torah Shebal Peh, again, Torah Shebal Peh being what we call Mishna and Gemara, then you can dedicate most of your time to Gemara with a capital G. the kind of creative interpretive work. The kind of creative interpretive work. The third category, the green category, here in the 11th halacha. And then your study of Torah She-Baal Peh and Torah She-Bechtav is merely to maintenance work. It's to make sure that you don't forget everything. To make sure that you don't forget everything. This is a pretty significant reinterpretation of the Gemara on a few counts. First of all, the introduction of Pardes is really quite significant. Whatever Pardes is, it's not what we conventionally think of as traditional Talmud Torah. As a matter of fact, this is one of the things for which the Rambam was very, very severely criticized by those that opposed his openness to philosophical study. But this notion that once you've mastered kind of the canon of Torah She-Baal Peh and Torah She-Bechtav, or Mikra, Mishna, and what we call colloquially Gemara, the bulk of your time should be dedicated to what I'll summarize by saying creative, reflective interpretation is really quite an interesting idea. That you have to learn a lot in order to then be creative. It's reminiscent of Picasso, who was so. I mean, we who grew up in a world where Picasso images are so almost banal that we're used to seeing them, and they're used in commercials, and you can see them on the side of buses. In the history of art, you can't forget how radical and how innovative and what a breakthrough it was when Picasso started doing what we think of as Picasso's work. So they once asked him, how did you learn how to be Picasso? So he said, well, first I had to have training as a classical artist. I had to, somebody can, I'm sure, Google and find the exact quote. I had to learn how to, it was something like I first had to learn how to draw like Rembrandt before I could learn how to draw like a child. That first you have to master the canon. And once you've done that, then you can really be creative. It's like it's like somebody that goes to the museum, looks at Picasso and says, I could do that in a minute. But really you can't. Even Jackson Pollock, who to the uninitiated looks like just a madman who threw paint on the floor. There was a method to the madness. Or Rothko, or any of these, great abstract or post-abstract artists, first you have to learn how to be a conventional artist. First you have to master a canon. And once you've done that, once you've absorbed, please don't misinterpret me, I'm not comparing Jackson Pollock to Moshe Feinstein or Shlomo Zalman Auerbach. But once you've mastered the canon, which for the Rambam is parts 1 and 2, Torah She-Bechtav and Torah She-Baal Peh, or what we call Mikra and Mishna Gemara on the other, then you have not just the right, but the obligation to dedicate most of your time to creative study. Now, as a curricular point, this is very interesting, and that's what I'd like to spend some time next time talking about. I've written about this elsewhere. I'll hold on a second. Let me send the link. I'm posting a link. To a monograph that I wrote on some of these topics. If you're interested, you can take a look at that. At least, let's say the first few main sections, up to about halfway through, which is an analysis of some of these points in the Rambam, and we'll talk about that next week. What does the Rambam mean educationally? What does the Rambam mean pedagogically? What does the Rambam mean curricularly? And how does this all fit in with lifelong learning? With I guess what it is that we're supposed to be doing now as adult learners. Even though I admit we have not, none of us have mastered the first two curricular realms in the way that's necessary to be freed from really going further in a deep way. In other words, halavai, we'd all now just be learning the parsha in order to not forget. When in fact, we all of us learn the parsha, and we're still discovering things that we say, hey, how come I never noticed that before? If you're saying that, you're not merely not forgetting. Lon, could you pass me the Everett Fox? I found the Buber quote. I'll just end with that. It's a good quote, even though I said something which sounds like it disagrees. Buber said in 1926, "Read the Bible as though it was something entirely unfamiliar, as though it had not been set before you ready-made. Face the book with a new attitude as something new. Let whatever may happen occur between yourself and it. You do not know which of its sayings and images will overwhelm and mold you. But hold yourself open. Do not believe anything a priori. Do not disbelieve anything a priori. Read aloud the words written in the book in front of you. Hear the word you utter, and let it reach you." That's the quote. It's good advice, but it's not possible. It's not possible because we are all trapped by everything that we already know, even though our knowledge is usually very incomplete. But even incomplete knowledge, you know what's going to happen. It's like that story. There's that story about like the old Yiddish mama up in the balcony in shul, and they're reading about Yosef Chav, and Yosef goes down there, and they throw him into the pit. And as it's about to happen, she shouts out from the balcony, "Yosu, don't go down there! Don't you remember what they did to you last year?" So that's a good story, but it's funny because it couldn't have happened. It's funny because it couldn't have happened. But halavai, we would all have the ability to read the story every year, as if that could happen, as if we could trick ourselves into reading it without everything that we know about it. But that being said, who would want to give up everything that they know in order to be able to read further and further and further? Okay, so we'll continue next week, and we'll talk more about what this Rambam means.